The flashing blue lights didn't just signal a traffic stop. In Oakhaven County, they were often a prelude to a nightmare. For 72-year-old Harold Washington, seeing Officer Brody Miller approaching his window with a hand resting ominously on his holster wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a survival scenario. But Miller made one critical miscalculation that afternoon. He assumed the terrified elderly couple in the pristine 1967 Mustang were alone, helpless and without recourse. He didn't know that just a few miles down the road, a decorated Marine Corps major was driving home for the first time in 4 years, and he had zero tolerance for bullies with badges. The afternoon sun draped over the winding asphalt of Route 9 like a heavy golden blanket. It was the kind of heat that made the cicadas scream in the pines and the heat waves shimmy off the hood of the car. But inside the cherry-red 1967 Ford Mustang, the air conditioning was humming a cool, steady rhythm, battling the Georgia humidity with surprising efficiency for a vintage machine. Harold Washington adjusted his grip on the mahogany steering wheel. His hands, weathered by 40 years of sorting mail and tending to his rose garden, were steady, though a slight tremor of age occasionally ghosted through his fingers. He glanced at the passenger seat. Beatrice, his wife of 50 years, was humming along to a Sam Cooke tune, playing low on the radio, her eyes closed, a peaceful smile gracing her lips. She wore her Sunday best, a floral print dress with a lace collar and a matching hat perched carefully over her silver curls. "You realize we're making good time, Bee," Harold said softly, not wanting to break her reverie, but eager to share his satisfaction. "This engine. Tyrone wasn't lying. It runs smoother than the day it rolled off the line." Beatrice opened one eye, the brown iris sparkling with mischief. "That boy spent more money on this car than he did on his own education, I swear. But it does ride nice, Harry. Real nice." "It's not just a car, Bear," Harold corrected, gently tapping the dashboard with affection. "It's a restoration, a project. He wanted us to have something special for the golden anniversary." They were passing through Oakhaven County, a stretch of rural landscape dominated by sprawling estates, manicured horse farms, and a reputation that kept many folks from the neighboring city of Atlanta on the interstate and away from the back roads. Oakhaven was old money, and old money often liked its privacy, protected by a very specific type of law enforcement. Harold checked his speedometer, 34 in a 35 zone. He was a man who lived by the rules. He had raised 3 children on a postal worker's salary, paid his taxes early, and never so much as jaywalked. He believed in order. He believed that if you did right by the world would eventually do right by you. But as they rounded a bend, shaded by ancient weeping willows, the rearview mirror exploded with blinding bursts of blue and red. Harold's stomach dropped. It was a visceral physical reaction, a cold stone settling in his gut despite the heat outside. The siren didn't wail. It just gave a short, aggressive whoop-whoop a command, not a warning. "Oh, Lord," Beatrice whispered, her hand flying to the pearl necklace at her throat. "Harry, what did you do?" "Nothing, Bear. I'm doing 34. Harold said, his voice tighter than he intended. He signaled right and slowly pulled the pristine Mustang onto the gravel shoulder, the tires crunching loudly in the sudden silence of the cabin. "It's probably just a check. Maybe a tail light is out." He put the car in park and killed the engine. He rolled down the window. He placed both hands on the top of the steering wheel, 10 and 2 palms open and visible. He knew the drill. Every black father in the South knew the drill, and he had taught it to Tyrone before the boy could even reach the pedals. In the side mirror, he saw the cruiser. It was a black Dodge Charger, aggressive and sleek. Two figures emerged. The driver was a tall, thick-set man with a shaved head and sunglasses that obscured his eyes. He walked with a swagger, a thumb hooked into his duty belt, his other hand resting too casually near the grip of his service weapon. The passenger was younger, a woman with her hair pulled back in a severe bun, looking nervous as she touched the radio on her shoulder. Officer Brodie Miller. The nameplate would later become etched in Harold's memory, but for now he was just a looming silhouette blocking out the sun. Miller didn't come to the window immediately. He stood by the rear bumper, tapping the taillight with his baton, a slow, rhythmic tink, tink, tink. It was a power move. He was checking the plates, sure, but he was also letting them stew, letting the fear marinade. "Harry, my heart is racing," Beatrice murmured, pressing a hand to her chest. "Just breathe, honey. Don't make any sudden moves. Let me do the talking," Harold said, staring straight ahead. Finally, Miller sauntered up to the window. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask for license and registration immediately. He leaned down, resting his beefy forearms on the doorframe, chewing gum with an open mouth. The smell of stale coffee and mint wafted into the car. "Nice ride," Miller said, his voice a gravelly drawl that didn't sound like a compliment. It sounded like an accusation. "Thank you, officer," Harold said, keeping his eyes forward. "Must cost a pretty penny. Vintage like this. Restored, too." Miller looked around the interior, his gaze lingering on Beatrice, then the leather seats, then back to Harold. "What line of work you in, Pop?" "I'm retired, sir. Postal service." Miller chuckled a dry, humorless sound. "Postal service? Huh? They paying mailmen 6 figures these days. Or maybe you hit the lottery. My son purchased the vehicle for us. Officer," Harold said, his patience fraying by a millimeter. "Is there a problem? Was I speeding?" Miller's smile vanished. He stood up straight, his hand dropping to his holster again. "You asking me questions? I ask the questions here. License and registration." The air inside the Mustang grew heavy, the joy of the Sunday drive evaporating into a suffocating tension. Harold moved slowly. He narrated his actions, a habit born of survival instinct. "I'm going to reach into my back pocket for my wallet, officer," Harold stated clearly. Miller didn't respond verbally. He just tapped his fingers on the doorframe, a silent hurry up. Harold retrieved his worn leather wallet and extracted his license. Then he pointed to the glove compartment. "The registration is in the glove box, sir. I'm going to open it now." "Watch it!" Miller snapped, his body tensing. Slowly. Harold opened the latch. Inside, neatly organized, were the papers. He handed them over. Miller snatched them, holding them up to the sunlight, as if looking for a watermark, or perhaps a stain of guilt. The second officer, Officer Sarah Jenkins, had moved to the passenger side. She was peering in through the window at Beatrice. Beatrice offered a weak, trembling smile. Jenkins didn't smile back, but she didn't look hateful, just uncomfortable. She looked like someone who knew something was wrong but lacked the spine to say it. Harold Washington. Miller read from the license, mispronouncing the last name, slightly adding a mocking inflection. "And the car is registered to Tyrone Washington." "My son," Harold confirmed. "And where is Tyrone?" Miller asked, leaning back in. "He local, or is he running product up from Miami?" Harold gripped the wheel tighter. "My son is a major in the United States Marine Corps officer. He is currently stationed at Camp Lejeune, but he is on leave." Miller laughed out loud this time. He looked over the roof of the car at Jenkins. "You hear that, Jenkins? We got a Marine's daddy here. A major, no less." He turned back to Harold, his face hardening into a sneer. "You know how many times I hear that. My son's in the service. My cousin's a judge. It don't make the drugs in the trunk disappear pop. "There are no drugs in this car," Harold said, his voice rising in pitch. The indignation was starting to bubble over the fear. "We are going to church supper in Savannah. We are law-abiding citizens." "Step out of the car," Miller commanded. "What, why?" "I said step out of the vehicle," Miller shouted, unclipping the safety strap on his holster. "I smell marijuana. Probable cause. Get out." "Now, there is no marijuana," Beatrice cried out, tears welling in her eyes. "We don't smoke. We've never smoked in our lives." "Ma'am, keep your hands where I can see them," Jenkins barked from the other side, her nervousness translating into sudden volume. Harold looked at his wife, seeing the terror in her eyes. He knew that if he argued, he might die. If he resisted, he might die. If he got out, he might still get hurt, but it was the only option. "I'm getting out," Harold said, his voice trembling. "I'm unbuckling my seatbelt." He clicked the button. The belt retracted. Harold opened the door and stepped out onto the gravel. His knees popped, and he stumbled slightly on the uneven ground. Miller was on him instantly. He grabbed Harold by the wrist and spun him around, slamming him face first onto the hot roof of the Mustang. The metal burned Harold's cheek. "Hey, you're hurting him!" Beatrice screamed, scrambling to undo her own belt. "Stay in the car!" Jenkins yelled, pulling her service weapon and pointing it low at the tire, but the threat was clear. "Spread 'em!" Miller hissed in Harold's ear. He kicked Harold's ankles apart, much wider than was comfortable for a man of 72. Pain shot up Harold's hips. "Officer, please!" Harold gasped. The wind knocked out of him. "I have arthritis. You don't need to do this." "Stop resisting," Miller shouted for the dash cam, though Harold was limp as a rag doll. Miller patted him down aggressively, his hands rough and invasive. He emptied Harold's pockets a handkerchief, a roll of peppermint candies, a pocket knife with a 1-inch blade. "Weapon," Miller yelled, tossing the tiny knife onto the hood. "We got a weapon. It's for peeling apples," Harold groaned. "And I suppose the drugs are for baking pies," Miller retorted. He handcuffed Harold, cinching the metal cuffs so tight they bit into the fragile skin of his wrists. He shoved Harold toward the back of the cruiser. "You sit in the back while we tear this fancy car apart. If I find so much as a seed, you're going away for a long time, Grandpa." Harold sat in the back of the Charger, the hard plastic seat, unforgiving. The air conditioner in the cruiser wasn't on, or, if it was, it wasn't reaching the back. He watched through the wire mesh as Miller opened the driver's door of the Mustang. He watched as Miller ripped the contents of the glove box out, scattering the insurance papers and maps onto the floorboard. He watched as Miller took his baton and poked at the leather seats, looking for hollow spots. Beatrice was standing by the side of the road now, clutching her purse, sobbing quietly, while Officer Jenkins stood over her, looking torn between duty and shame. "This isn't right," Harold whispered to himself, a tear tracking through the dust on his cheek. "We did everything right." Miller moved to the trunk. He popped it open. Inside was a picnic basket, a spare tire, and a neatly folded blanket. Miller dumped the basket. Fried chicken and potato salad spilled onto the pristine trunk liner. He threw the blanket into the ditch. "Find anything?" Jenkins called out, her voice thin. "Not yet." Miller grunted, sweat dripping from his nose. "But these types, they're good at hiding it. Call the K9 unit. I want a dog on this." "Brody, it's Sunday. The K9 unit is 40 minutes out," Jenkins said. "Maybe we should just write the warning and call the damn dog." Miller roared, his face turning red. "He gave me attitude. He's driving a car he can't afford. He's got a weapon. We wait." Harold closed his eyes. 40 minutes. 40 minutes of his wife standing in the heat. 40 minutes of humiliation. He prayed. He prayed for strength. He prayed for justice. And then he heard the rumble. It wasn't the whine of a siren. It was the deep, guttural roar of a heavy engine. Not a muscle car, but something bigger. A truck. Harold opened his eyes and looked out the rear window. Coming down the road, moving fast, was a matte black Ford F350 Dually. It had a lift kit, a brush guard, and a Marine Corps bumper sticker, clearly visible even from this distance. The truck slowed down as it approached the scene. Miller looked up, annoyed that someone was interrupting his power trip. He stepped into the road, raising his hand to wave the truck past. "Keep moving," Miller shouted. The truck didn't keep moving. It pulled onto the shoulder directly behind the police cruiser, blocking the lane. The engine cut. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with a new kind of electricity. The driver's door opened. A boot hit the gravel, a polished tan combat boot. Harold's heart skipped a beat. He knew those boots. A man stepped out. He was 6'4", built like a linebacker carved out of granite. He wore cargo pants and a tight olive green t-shirt that strained against his biceps. He had a high and tight haircut and scars on his forearms that told stories of places far worse than Oakhaven County. He took off his sunglasses. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and currently burning with a cold, lethal fury as he took in the scene, his mother crying by the ditch, his father's car ransacked, and his father locked in the back of a police cruiser. Major Tyrone Washington had arrived, and he wasn't here to negotiate. The gravel crunched rhythmically under Major Tyrone Washington's boots, a sound that seemed to synchronize with the pounding of Officer Miller's heart, though Miller would never admit it. The officer turned his hand, hovering over his weapon, his posture screaming aggression. "Back in your vehicle," Miller barked, pointing a finger at Tyrone. "This is an active police investigation. You are interfering." Tyrone didn't stop. He didn't rush either. He moved with a terrifying, fluid deliberation. He stopped exactly 10 feet away, close enough to be heard clearly, far enough not to be considered an immediate physical threat in a court of law. He raised his hands slightly, palms open, showcasing he was unarmed, but his eyes were locked onto Miller's like a predator acquiring a target. "Officer." Tyrone's voice was a low rumble, projecting perfectly without shouting. It was the voice of a man who commanded battalions. "That woman crying by the ditch is my mother. The man you have cuffed in the back of that cruiser is my father. And the car you are currently dismantling belongs to me." Miller blinked. The information hit him like a physical blow, but his ego, swollen by years of unchecked authority in Oakhaven, refused to deflate. "I don't care if you're the Pope. Get back in your truck or I will arrest you for obstruction of justice." "On what grounds?" Tyrone asked, crossing his arms now. "I am standing on a public easement. I am observing a traffic stop involving my property. I am not impeding your work. However, I am noticing that you have a 72-year-old man in a non-ventilated vehicle in 90-degree heat. If he suffers a cardiac event, officer, that becomes a federal issue." "He's fine," Miller snapped, though he glanced nervously at the cruiser, where Harold was slumped, sweat pouring down his face. "He doesn't look fine," Tyrone countered, his voice sharpening. "And neither does your probable cause." Miller stepped away from the Mustang, leaving the door open. He puffed out his chest, trying to use his height to intimidate Tyrone, but Tyrone was an inch taller and about 40 pounds of muscle heavier. "I smelled marijuana. That's probable cause. We're conducting a search." Tyrone let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Marijuana." "In that car, officer, my father is a deacon. My mother runs the church choir. That car is a 1967 restoration that I have spent $50,000 on. Nobody smokes in that car. Nobody eats in that car. The only thing you smell is your own desperation to make a quota." "Watch your mouth, boy," Miller growled, stepping into Tyrone's personal space. "Major," Tyrone corrected instantly, his face inches from Miller's. "Major Washington, and you will address me as such, or you can address my JAG officer when I file a formal complaint for conduct unbecoming and racial profiling." Officer Jenkins, standing by Beatrice, looked as if she wanted to melt into the asphalt. She stepped forward tentatively. "Brody, Miller, maybe we should check on the prisoner. It is hot." "Shut up, Jenkins," Miller yelled, not breaking eye contact with Tyrone. "I run this stop." "You're running it into the ground," Tyrone said. He pulled a cell phone from his pocket. "I'm recording this now, live, to the cloud. So, Officer Miller, tell me again about the marijuana. Did you find any—" "The dog is coming," Miller said, his confidence wavering slightly at the sight of the phone. "Good," Tyrone said. "I'll wait. But while we wait, you're going to give my mother some water, and you're going to open the window for my father. Now." It wasn't a request. It was an order. And for the first time in his career, Miller felt the weight of authority pressing down on him, not from a badge, but from sheer force of will. "Jenkins," Miller grunted, "give the lady a water. Crack the window for the perp." "Suspect," Tyrone corrected again. "He is a suspect, and barely that." As Jenkins hurried to the cruiser to lower the window, Harold gasped for air. "Tyrone, son!" "I'm here, Pop." Tyrone called out, his voice softening instantly. "Don't you worry. Just breathe. I've got this. Neither of you is going to jail today." "He had a knife," Miller threw out, desperate to regain the upper hand. "A weapon." Tyrone looked at the hood of the car, where the tiny pocket knife sat glinting in the sun. He picked it up before Miller could stop him, inspected it, and tossed it back down. A paring knife. Really, did he lunge at you with it? Did he brandish it? "It was on his person," Miller said defensively. "It's legal to carry a pocket knife in Georgia with a blade under 5 inches, Tyrone recited. "That is barely 1 inch. You're reaching, Miller, and you're reaching with dirty hands." At that moment, the sound of another siren cut through the air. A white SUV with sheriff emblazoned on the side came tearing around the corner, lights blazing. Miller smirked. "Looks like the cavalry is here. You're done now, Major." Tyrone didn't turn around. He just smiled, a cold, predatory baring of teeth. "We'll see about that." Sheriff Buford Billings was a man who resembled a bulldog standing on its hind legs. He was short, wide, and wore a cowboy hat that had seen better days. He had been the sheriff of Oakhaven County for 20 years, running the department like his own personal fiefdom. He hoisted himself out of the SUV, hitching up his belt, which struggled to contain his midsection. He walked into the scene with the air of a tired father, coming home to squabbling children. He looked at Miller, then at Tyrone, then at the weeping Beatrice. All right, Billings drawled. "What in the Sam Hill is going on here? Traffic's backed up for a mile, Sheriff Tartle." Miller said, stepping forward quickly to get his version of the story out first. "I initiated a traffic stop. 34 in a 35 suspicious behavior. Smelled weed. Driver resisted. Found a weapon. Now this individual pulled up, blocked the scene, and is interfering with my investigation." Billings looked at Tyrone. He squinted. He saw the military bearing the expensive truck, the rank. He was a politician, and he knew a potential PR nightmare when he saw one. "That true, son?" Billings asked Tyrone. "Sheriff Billings," Tyrone said, recognizing the man from local news. "I am Major Tyrone Washington, USMC. The suspects are my elderly parents. Officer Miller here has assaulted my father, traumatized my mother, and ransacked my vehicle based on a fabricated smell of narcotics. I stopped to ensure their safety." Billings took off his hat and wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. "Major, thank you for your service. Now look, Miller's a good cop. If he says he smelled something, he smelled nothing," Tyrone cut in, "and we can prove it." "The dog is 10 minutes out," Miller insisted. "We'll find it." "Sheriff," Tyrone said, changing tactics. He lowered his voice, stepping closer to Billings, speaking man to man. "My father is 72. He has a heart condition. If he dies in that car, because your deputy has an ego problem, I will own this county by the time the lawsuit is over. I'm not talking about a settlement. I'm talking about federal investigation. I'm talking about the DOJ auditing every stop Miller has made in the last 5 years. Billings stiffened. The mention of the DOJ Department of Justice was the magic word. Small-town sheriffs feared nothing more than the feds poking around their books. "Now hold on," Billings said, holding up a hand. "Nobody needs to die. Miller, get the man out of the car. Uncuff him. Let him sit on the bumper." "But Sheriff," Miller protested. "Do it," Billings barked. Miller scowled, but complied. He opened the door and hauled Harold out. Harold stumbled, his legs weak. Tyrone was there in a flash, catching his father before he fell. He glared at Miller, a look so full of promise of future pain that Miller actually took a step back. "You okay, Pop?" Tyrone asked, checking his father's wrists. They were bruised and bleeding. Tyrone's jaw tightened. "I'm okay, son. Just humiliated," Harold whispered. "Sheriff," Tyrone said, pointing to the wrists. "Excessive force on a compliant senior citizen. You seeing this?" "I see it," Billings grunted. He was trying to figure out an exit strategy. "Look, Major, maybe Miller was a bit overzealous. The heat gets to everyone. Why don't we just call this a misunderstanding? You take your folks, go home. We drop the speeding ticket." It was the classic sweep-under-the-rug maneuver. No paperwork, no admission of guilt, just go away. "No," Tyrone said firmly. Billings blinked. "Excuse me." I said no. "This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a violation of civil rights. We aren't just leaving. I want a report filed. I want badge numbers. And I want to know why my car looks like a tornado hit it." "If we file a report," Billings said, his voice hardening, "then we have to wait for the dog. And if the dog hits Major, I can't help you. Your daddy goes to jail." "Bring the dog," Tyrone challenged. "I insist." Billings looked at Miller. "You sure about the smell, Brody?" Miller looked at the pristine car, then at the intense stare of the Major. He started to sweat. I thought I smelled it. Maybe it was a skunk nearby. But I'm sure." "Bring the dog," Tyrone repeated. 10 minutes later, the K9 unit arrived. A German shepherd led by a handler circled the car. The dog sniffed the tires, the open doors, the trunk, the scattered picnic basket. The dog didn't sit. It didn't bark. It wagged its tail at Beatrice and tried to eat a piece of spilled potato salad. "Nothing," the handler called out. "Clean as a whistle." The silence on the side of the road was deafening. Tyrone looked at Billings. "No drugs, no probable cause, which means the search was illegal. The detention was illegal. And the assault on my father was illegal." Billings sighed. He looked at Miller with pure disdain. "Miller, give them their license back. Jenkins, help the lady pick up her things." "I'm not done," Tyrone said. "Major, you won," Billings said tiredly. "Go home." "I have a dash cam," Tyrone said. Miller froze. Billings froze. "In the Mustang?" Miller asked, his face draining of color. "I didn't see a camera. It's not on the windshield," Tyrone explained calmly. "It's a covert system integrated into the rear-view mirror housing, motion activated, audio and video, and it uploads to a secure cloud server instantly via an internal 4G SIM card. It's been recording since you turned on your lights." Tyrone held up his phone again. He tapped the screen and turned it around. On the screen, a crystal-clear video played. It showed Miller approaching. It captured the audio perfectly. postal service, huh? They paying mailmen 6 figures these days. It captured the sneer. It captured the lack of provocation. It captured the boy comments. "I have the footage," Tyrone said. "And by the time I get home, my lawyer will have it, and the local news stations." Billings looked at the phone, then at Miller. He knew in that moment that his quiet life was over. "Major War," Billings said, his voice pleading now. "We can handle this internally. We have disciplinary procedures. There's no need to drag the department through the mud." "The mud is where you operate, Sheriff," Tyrone said. "I'm just turning on the lights." Tyrone helped his father into the passenger seat of the truck. "Mum, you ride with me. Pop, you too. I'll call a tow for the Mustang. I don't want you driving right now." "I can drive, son," Harold said, trying to regain some dignity. "I know you can pop, but you don't have to," Tyrone said gently. He turned back to the officers. "I'll be in touch," Tyrone said. "Expect to hear from us." He loaded his parents into the massive Ford F-350. As he drove away, the dust kicking up into the faces of the officers, Miller kicked the tire of his cruiser in frustration. "You idiot!" Billings hissed at Miller. "You absolute moron! You just stopped the wrong car." "I didn't know," Miller whined. "That's the problem," Brody Billings said, staring at the retreating truck. "You never know. And now we're all going to pay for it." The ride to the Washington family home was quiet. Harold stared out the window, rubbing his wrists. Beatrice sniffled occasionally, clutching Tyrone's hand across the center console. "I'm sorry, Tyrone," Harold said finally. "I'm sorry you had to come home to this." "Don't apologize, Pop," Tyrone said, his eyes on the road, but his mind racing. "You did nothing wrong. That man is a predator, and predators don't stop until someone makes them stop." When they arrived at the house, a modest, well-kept brick ranch on 3 acres, Tyrone settled his parents in. He made them tea. He checked his father's blood pressure. It was dangerously high, but stabilizing. Once they were resting, Tyrone went into his old bedroom, which he had converted into a temporary office. He opened his laptop. He logged into the dashcam cloud service. There were 3 files: the approach, the extraction, the search. He watched them. The anger that he had suppressed on the roadside, the cold discipline of the Marine, finally gave way to a hot, righteous fury. He watched Miller manhandle his father. He heard the mockery. He opened his email. He composed a message to his friend David Cohen, a civil rights attorney in Atlanta who was known as the Shark for his aggressive litigation against corrupt municipalities. Subject urgent, police misconduct, video evidence attached. Then he made a decision. Legal channels were slow. The court of public opinion was fast. He opened Twitter X and YouTube. He created a thread. Title: Oak Haven PD assaults 72-year-old veteran and wife. Claims weed smell to tear apart restored classic car. He uploaded the video clips. He didn't editorialize much. He just stated the facts. Time 2:00 p.m. Location: Route 9. Victims: Harold and Beatrice Washington. Officer: Brody Miller. Result: negative search. Physical injuries to elderly driver. He hit post. Tyrone had a modest following on social media, mostly fellow Marines and military enthusiasts. But the algorithm loves injustice. It loves clear, high-definition video of authority figures abusing their power. The first hour it had 500 views. By dinner time, when Beatrice was frying catfish to try and normalize the evening, it had 10,000 views. By the time the sun went down, a prominent activist in Atlanta with 2 million followers retweeted it. This is disgusting. Look at how he treats this elder. Hashtag Justice for Harold. Hashtag Oak Haven Corruption. Then the heavy hitters arrived. A famous podcast host picked it up. A senator retweeted it. By midnight, the video had 1.5 million views. The hashtag Fire Officer Miller was trending #1 in Georgia and #4 in the United States. The phone at the Oakhaven Sheriff's Department began to ring. It didn't stop. At the Washington house, Tyrone's phone buzzed. It was David Cohen. "Ty." David's voice was crisp. "I just saw the video. I'm already drafting the lawsuit, but you need to brace yourself. They are going to come after you. They're going to try to dig up dirt on you. Your dad, your mum, everyone." "Let them dig," Tyrone said, looking at a framed photo of his father in his postal uniform. "My father has walked the same mail route for 40 years. He's delivered birthday cards and draft notices. He's spotless. And me, I'm an open book." "Good," David said, "because I'm driving down there tomorrow morning, and I'm bringing the press." The next morning, the Karma train pulled into the station, and it didn't have brakes. The morning sun over Oakhaven usually brought the sound of roosters and distant tractors. Today, it brought the thrum of news helicopters and the heavy idle of satellite vans. They were parked all along the gravel shoulder of Route 9, their cameras pointed at the stretch of road where Harold Washington had been handcuffed. Sheriff Buford Billings watched the circus from his office window, his coffee turning cold and bitter in his mug. He had slept 2 hours. His phone had rung non-stop since 4 a.m. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, the BBC, they all wanted a statement. Sheriff, his secretary frantic and pale, buzzed in on the intercom. "The mayor is on line 1, the governor's office is on line 2, and there's a lawyer named David Cohen in the lobby. He says he's not leaving until he has the unredacted body cam footage and Miller's disciplinary file." Billings slammed his fist on the desk. "Tell the mayor I'm handling it. Tell the governor I'm busy. And tell that lawyer to sit tight." He turned to Officer Brody Miller, who was sitting in a chair in the corner, looking less like a tough cop and more like a cornered animal. Miller was scrolling through his phone, his face a mixture of rage and panic. "They're finding everything, Sheriff," Miller whispered. "They found my old Facebook posts from high school. They found the complaint from the Thompson stop last year." "I told you to scrub your social media," Billings hissed. "And the Thompson complaint was sealed." "Nothing is sealed anymore," Miller said, looking up, eyes bloodshot. "They're calling me a monster. My wife took the kids to her mother's. She says she can't deal with the death threats." "You brought this on yourself," Billings said coldly. "I told you. You stopped the wrong car. You messed with a man who has the discipline of a soldier and the resources of a lawyer." Down at the Washington house, the scene was different, but equally chaotic. Tyrone had set up a perimeter. He politely but firmly told the reporters to stay off the property. He stood on the porch, arms crossed, a silent sentinel. Inside, David Cohen sat at the kitchen table with Harold and Beatrice. Cohen was a small man with sharp features and an energy that vibrated the air around him. He was reviewing the dashcam footage frame by frame. "This is gold," Cohen muttered. "Absolute gold. The way he escalated textbook civil rights violation. But here's the kicker, Harold. Look at the timestamp when he searches the trunk." Harold squinted at the screen. 1:14 p.m. "Now look at the dispatch log we pulled from the public scanner archives," Cohen said, sliding a paper over. "He didn't call in the stop until 1:16 p.m. "So?" Beatrice asked, pouring more tea. "So?" Cohen smiled, a shark sensing blood. "He had already detained you and started searching before he even let dispatch know he had stopped a car. That's a violation of procedure. It implies premeditation. He wasn't stopping a speeder. He was hunting." "What do we do?" Harold asked. "We don't just sue for damages," Cohen said, closing his folder. "We go for the throat. We demand a federal investigation into the entire department." Tyrone stepped inside. Yeah, we have enough to hold a press conference. I want to do it today, at the county courthouse steps. We control the narrative before Billings can spin it. Let's do it, Tyrone said. But Pop stays here. I don't want him in front of the cameras yet. His heart can't take the shouting. I'll go, Beatrice said suddenly. She stood up, smoothing her dress. Her voice was shaky but determined. I want to look that sheriff in the eye. Mom, you don't have to, Tyrone started. He made my husband kneel on the ground like a criminal. Beatrice said, her eyes flashing fire. I'm going. At 2:00 p.m., the Oakhaven County Courthouse steps were swarming. Microphones from 20 different outlets were taped to the podium. When Tyrone Washington, in his full dress blue uniform, which he had donned for maximum impact, walked out with his mother on his arm, and David Cohen, trailing behind the crowd, went silent. The visual was striking the impeccable Marine Major and the sweet elderly church lady facing down the establishment. Cohen stepped up first. My name is David Cohen. I represent the Washington family. What you saw on that video was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a disease that has infected the Oakhaven Sheriff's Department. He held up a stack of papers. Since the video went viral last night, my office has received 50 calls. 50. From other residents of this county. People who were too afraid to speak up until they saw Major Washington stand his ground. We have stories of illegal seizures, intimidation, and planted evidence. A murmur went through the crowd. We are demanding the immediate termination of Officer Brody Miller, Cohen continued. But we are also demanding the resignation of Sheriff Buford Billings for covering up a pattern of abuse that has terrorized this community for a decade. Then Beatrice stepped up. She was short, barely reaching the microphones. Tyrone adjusted them for her. She looked into the cameras. My husband served this country by delivering its mail for 40 years. My son serves this country by leading its Marines. We have never asked for anything but respect. Yesterday that man took our dignity. He made us feel small. He made us feel like we didn't belong on the road we pay taxes for. She paused, wiping a tear. But my son reminded me of something. We do belong, and we aren't going anywhere. The crowd erupted in applause. Inside the sheriff's office, Billings turned off the TV. The room was silent. He's asking for your resignation, Sheriff, Miller said quietly. Billings looked at Miller. He looked at the badge on his own chest. He had spent 20 years building his power base. He wasn't going to lose it because of one screw-up deputy. He wants a head, Billings murmured. He wants a sacrifice. Billings stood up and unlocked his drawer. He pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Sheriff. Miller stood up, confused. What are you doing? I'm saving my department, Brody. Billings said, his voice flat. I just got off the phone with the district attorney. They reviewed the footage. They're charging you. Charging me with what? Miller's voice cracked. Assault, false imprisonment, violation of oath of office, and filing a false police report. You wrote in your preliminary notes that you saw a weapon in his hand. The video shows it was in his pocket. You told me to write that, Miller screamed. You said to always cover our bases. I never told you to lie. Billings lied effortlessly. Turn around, Brody. You can't do this. I know where the bodies are buried. Buford, I know about the election funds. Miller yelled, backing away. 2 other deputies' men Miller had worked with for years stepped into the room. They looked grim, but they moved toward him. They knew which way the wind was blowing. If they didn't sacrifice Miller, the feds would come for all of them. Don't make this harder, Billings said. Miller was handcuffed in the middle of the sheriff's office. The betrayal was total. The karma was swift. He was being fed to the wolves by the very system he thought protected him. 3 months had passed since the incident on Route 9. But in the Oakhaven County Courthouse, the air was still thick with the heat of that July afternoon. The courtroom was packed to capacity, a suffocating mix of local residents, national press, and curious onlookers who had traveled hours just to see the finale of the drama that had gripped the internet. The wooden pews creaked under the weight of the crowd, and the low hum of whispered conversations ceased instantly as the bailiff called the court to order. It wasn't often that a police officer stood trial in Oakhaven. For decades, the badge had been a shield impervious to scrutiny, but today that shield lay shattered on the defense table. Brody Miller sat alone. He wore a grey suit that was clearly bought off the rack, ill-fitting at the shoulders and tight at the waist, a stark contrast to the tailored uniform he used to wear like armor. He had lost significant weight. His face, once full of swagger and arrogance, was now gaunt, his skin possessing a pallid, unhealthy sheen. He stared at his hands, unwilling to meet the gaze of the gallery. His wife wasn't there. She had filed for divorce weeks ago, taking their children and fleeing the death threats that had besieged their home. His pension was frozen. He was currently living in a budget motel, 2 towns over his legal fees, covered by a bail bondsman who looked ready to revoke the bond at any moment. The trial had been a grueling week of deconstruction. David Cohen, assisting the prosecution with a ferocity that terrified the defense, had systematically dismantled Miller's life. He didn't just present the facts of the Washington stop, he opened the floodgates. Witnesses who had been silenced for years, scared into submission by threats from Sheriff Billings, finally found their voices. A young college student whose scholarship was ruined by a planted drug charge wept on the stand. A single mother described how Miller had seized her car on a technicality, leaving her unable to get to work. But the courtroom held its collective breath for the final witness, Major Tyrone Washington. Tyrone took the stand, not with anger, but with a terrifying, disciplined calm. Dressed in a dark suit that emphasized his military bearing, he looked every inch the officer and gentleman. He sat with a straight spine, his hands resting lightly on his knees, his expression unreadable as the prosecutor queued up the video evidence one last time. The screen flickered to life. The sound of Miller's sneering voice filled the silent room. Postal service, huh? They paying mailmen 6 figures these days. Miller flinched at the sound of his own voice. Tyrone didn't blink. The defense attorney, a court-appointed lawyer who looked as if he would rather be anywhere else, tried to salvage the unsalvageable during cross-examination. Major Washington. The lawyer began his voice, wavering slightly. Officer Miller stated in his report that he saw a glint of metal. In the heat of the moment, with adrenaline pumping, is it not possible he genuinely feared for his life? You are a military man. You understand the fog of war. Tyrone paused. He turned his head slowly to look at the jury box. He made eye contact with each juror, the school teacher, the mechanic, the retired nurse. I have been in combat zones, ladies and gentlemen. Tyrone said his voice, a low, resonant rumble that reached the back of the room without a microphone. I have led Marines through urban warfare, where every window could hide a sniper. I know what a threat looks like. I know what fear tastes like. He turned back to the lawyer, his gaze hardening. A 72-year-old deacon standing with a cane holding a registration paper is not a threat. He was compliant. He was terrified. Officer Miller was not experiencing the fog of war. He was experiencing boredom. And he was exercising cruelty because he thought no one was watching. The silence that followed was absolute. The defense attorney closed his folder. He had no further questions. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. To Miller it must have felt like 4 years. He sat rocking slightly in his chair, wiping sweat from his upper lip, looking toward the back of the room for Sheriff Billings. But Billings wasn't there. The sheriff had abandoned him the moment the indictment came down, hoping to save his own skin. When the jury returned, the foreman, a stern-faced man who owned the local hardware store, stood up. He didn't look at Miller. In the matter of the State versus Brody Miller, the foreman announced, his voice steady. On the charge of aggravated assault, we find the defendant guilty. Miller let out a small, strangled sound. On the charge of false imprisonment, guilty. On the charge of violation of oath of office, guilty. Miller put his head in his hands and sobbed. It wasn't the weeping of a man sorry for what he had done. It was the pathetic cry of a bully who had finally met a force he couldn't intimidate. The judge, showing no leniency, sentenced him to 10 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for the first 5. As the bailiffs moved in to handcuff him, real cuffs this time, not for show, Miller looked small. The monster of Route 9 was just a man in a cheap suit being led away to a cage. But the cleansing of Oakhaven didn't stop with Miller. Sheriff Buford Billings had tried to survive the purge by feeding Miller to the wolves. It was a miscalculation. The Department of Justice investigation that Tyrone had threatened and David Cohen had facilitated struck with the precision of a drone strike. The federal audit revealed that Billings had been using civil forfeiture funds as his personal piggy bank, buying land for his brother's development company under shell corporations. Billings didn't even make it to trial. He resigned in disgrace 2 weeks after Miller's sentencing, striking a plea deal to avoid federal prison time in exchange for surrendering his assets and a permanent ban from holding public office. The Good Old Boys network had been dismantled brick by brick. 6 months after the incident, the Georgia autumn had painted the trees along Route 9 in brilliant strokes of burnt orange and crimson. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and cooling asphalt. The rumble of an engine cut through the quiet afternoon, not the aggressive roar of a police charger, but the throaty, confident purr of a fully restored 1967 Ford Mustang. Tyrone was behind the wheel this time. Harold sat in the passenger seat, his arm resting comfortably on the open window frame. The car gleamed in the sunlight, the cherry-red paint flawless, the interior smelling of fresh leather and victory. They weren't speeding. They were cruising. As they approached the bend, that specific stretch of road with the weeping willows and the gravel shoulder, a heavy silence fell over the car. This was the spot. The place where Harold had been thrown onto the hood. The place where he had felt most powerless. Tyrone noticed his father's hand tighten on the door handle. He eased his foot off the gas, slowing the Mustang to a gentle crawl. "You okay, Pop?" Tyrone asked softly, glancing over. Harold stared at the gravel shoulder. For months, he had seen it in his nightmares, lit by blinding blue lights. But today, under the golden autumn sun, it was just dirt. It was just grass. It was just a piece of ground. Harold took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the cool air. The phantom pain in his wrists, which had plagued him for weeks, seemed to recede. "I'm okay," Harold said, his voice gaining strength. He turned to look at his son. The profile of the major was strong, unyielding, yet filled with a tenderness that only family saw. "You know, Ty, for a long time, I thought keeping my head down was the only way to survive. I thought if I was quiet, if I followed every rule, they wouldn't hurt me." "That's how you survived, Pop," Tyrone said, keeping his eyes on the road, but reaching over to squeeze his father's shoulder. "You did what you had to do to raise us. You sacrificed your pride so we could have ours. There is no shame in that." Harold smiled, a genuine, eye-crinkling smile that years of worry had tried to erase. "And look at you now. You fought back. You didn't just fight for me, son. You fought for everyone who couldn't." "I'll always fight for you," Tyrone promised. They drove into town, the Mustang turning heads as it glided down Main Street. The atmosphere in Oakhaven had shifted. The sheriff's cruisers they passed were driven by new deputies hired by the interim sheriff, a woman elected, on a platform of transparency and reform. When they passed a patrol car, the deputy inside didn't glare. He offered a polite nod. They pulled into the church parking lot for the Sunday potluck. The gravel crunched under the tires, a sound that used to trigger anxiety in Harold, but now sounded like homecoming. Beatrice was waiting for them near the fellowship hall. She was holding a new wicker picnic basket, wearing her favorite blue hat. When she saw the red car pull in, she didn't look fearful. She waved her smile, bright, unburdened, and radiant. Tyrone put the car in park and killed the engine. The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was peaceful. "Smooth ride," Harold said, patting the dashboard with affection. "The smoothest," Tyrone agreed. They stepped out of the car, the doors closing with a solid, reassuring thud. They didn't walk as victims. They didn't walk as suspects. They walked as the Washington family victors who had faced the fire and come out refined like gold. As they walked toward Beatrice, Harold Washington stood a little taller. His arthritis still ached when it rained, and he still moved slow, but his spirit was unbowed. He wasn't just the retired mailman anymore. He was the man who had taken down a corrupt system without throwing a single punch, and next to him walked his son the Marine, who had taught Oak Haven a lesson it would never forget. Authority is nothing without honor, and justice, though sometimes delayed, is always worth the drive. The story of the Washington family is a stark reminder that while the badge represents authority, it is the character of the person wearing it that defines justice. Officer Miller believed his power was absolute, but he forgot that true power lies in truth community and the unyielding courage to stand up against wrong. The hard karma that hit Miller and Billings wasn't just bad luck. It was the inevitable consequence of their own actions, accelerated by a son's love, and the digital age's ability to shine a light in dark corners. This narrative isn't just about a traffic stop. It's about the breaking of a cycle of silence. It serves as a testament that when we document injustice and support one another, the systems that seem untouchable can indeed be dismantled. What would you do if you were in Tyrone's shoes? Would you have kept your cool, or would you have reacted differently? If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, hit that like button to help us spread this message. Share this video with someone who needs to see the good guys win for a change. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. We post new dramas and real-life inspired tales every week. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.